All right. So officially, thank you very much, Mr. La Fleur, for agreeing to participate in this interview. Purpose of the interview is to get your perspective as a parent, first of all, and then as an advocate within the community of persons who are deaf and hard of hearing. We have a particular focus on understanding the access that students who are deaf what that looks like when it comes to their access to education and what your own experience would have been around accessing education for your son, and because it's an education-based class, yeah? So I'll pass you over to Beverly and she would facilitate the questions moving forward. Beverly?
Good morning, Ms. La Fleur.
Qushiba is fine.
Okay, Qushiba. As a parent of a deaf child, can you share your early experiences within education in Trinidad and Tobago? I mean, were there any challenges in finding appropriate educational resources and support for your child?
Yes. So when I found out my son was deaf, he was 3 years old. He was attending a preschool, a regular preschool at the time. And well, I didn't know he was deaf. So when we found out that he was deaf, it was recommended that I find a school that would accommodate him for his needs, which is, I was told he needed to learn sign language and learning sign language at the time. So I visited numerous schools within the East-West corridor, but none of them were accommodating or suitable enough to accommodate his needs, where there were schools that catered for children with disabilities, and they did take in children who were deaf. However, nobody knew how to use sign language. So when I asked her, how are you going to teach him, I was told they do, they have ways of, they would have had ways of accommodating the students. And then that was one school only. The other 3 schools that we went to, they said straight out, no, they could not take a child with hearing, who had hearing challenges, because they did not know what to do or how to treat with them. So initially, to find a early childhood education setting was very, very challenging for him. And we had to wait until he was almost 6 going into 7 to get into Cascade School for the Deaf.
Okay. Were there any advocacy groups during this time accessible to you as a parent?
No, not that I is or was aware of at that time. No. When I found out my son was deaf, I had to figure it out. So even we did everything privately. So I went to Dr. Natasha Bratt, and she would have given me some things to read up on and tell me go online. At that time, we didn't have access to computers or internet like now. So I had to go to the cafe and read up more on what it was like. And she would have explained it's not a type of deafness that can be repaired or fixed or anything, because of how he was born premature and the hair follicles didn't develop. So that can't fix, and he would be deaf for life. So I had to figure it out on my own and probably do some reading and stuff like that. But there wasn't anyone, no doctors, no hospital, no clinic, nobody could have given me information, or even parents of themselves when we joined Cascade was able to share anything based on their experience when it came to me finding out my child was deaf.
So then, did this lead you to be involved in any advocacy efforts related to deaf education in Trinidad and Tobago?
No. That happened long after. When I found out my child was deaf, I wanted him to hear. So I was trying to figure out how to fix that. So it wasn't until my son was going on 11, he was going to do, going on 12, he was going to do SCA for the first time. And he said, you need to learn sign language, you know. And I said, why? And he said, because I doesn't understand nothing you're telling me. And I decided at that time I'll make a considered effort to actually pay attention to learning to sign. Because prior to that, I did learn like basic signing, alphabet and thing, but I find that was kind of nonsense. Yeah, I thought that was, why learning to sign for? I want my child to learn to hear. But at the time of 11 going on 12, we had a group of children who sat SCA, and their parents were having challenges with them getting into the secondary schools. Because what had happened was those children were, they did SCA, and because of the language difference when it comes to deaf language compared to standard English. They generally do not do that well when it comes to writing that composition, storytelling thing for SEA. And they did not score very high in English and in that composition part. So they got really low marks, and they were placed in junior life centers across the country. And the parents felt like the children, they deserve better than that, because it's not like they have to go all the way back to do remedial work, which they really weren't at that level. They were above that. And the advocacy started then without me even understanding that's what I was doing. We started lobbying to the Ministry of Education with the support of teachers and other persons who understood deaf education better than we had at the time, to get the children into secondary school. At that time, I didn't really understand the dynamics of all of that, but that's when the advocacy started, when he was 11.
So how did then the school environment impact your child's social and emotional development? And what opportunities for interaction with other deaf students were there?
So when he started school at 6, he had to start at Cascade School for the Deaf. He did not know any signs at all, because I was not learning sign language at that time. Within the first 2 weeks, he was teaching me certain things at home, because my son has a lot of speech. We invested 2 years into speech therapy because, like I said, I wanted my child to talk. So I put a lot of money and invested a lot of time into him learning to use whatever speech he has. So I used to use words, and we used to talk in the house, even though he wasn't really understanding well. But when he started school at 6, he actually started learning to sign. And I guess he was happier because he met children who were unable to hear just like himself. So he was able to socialize with those children. So he was a little more excited when he come home to talk about what happened in school. Sometimes I did understand, sometimes I didn't. But as the time went along, he transferred from Cascade and went into Good Shepherd Anglican in Tunapuna, because he was mainstreamed since he was that age. And the interaction between the deaf children in that unit and the hearing children in the primary school at Good Shepherd, even the teachers, and it was an amazing experience for him as well. So my son excelled pretty well throughout his school life. He did pretty well, because he had, he's that kind of person too, but he had that level of support and encouragement from not just like home, but the teachers and the other students and other people at the primary school level that supported him throughout that.
So what you're saying is Good Shepherd is a mainstream school.
Yeah.
So did other deaf children attend that school with him?
So
okay.
Good Shepherd and Belmont, the primary school in Belmont, they were units of Cascade School for the Deaf. So the children who were able, I guess on assessment, they were able to function well in the mainstream system. They would have mainstreamed those children into Good Shepherd Anglican or the primary school at Belmont, which I still can't remember the name. So yes, there were other students at the Good Shepherd Anglican. That was the best one anyway, just saying, yeah. There were other children there with my son at the time. I think the unit closed down a couple of years ago because of lack of repairs and stuff like that.
So how did your advocacy start? When did it start?
When he was 11, going on 12, I think it was in 2011 or 2012, somewhere there. That's when I started advocating. Like I said, I was not aware that is what I was doing until I was told by a friend, you're advocating, what I mean. But yeah, I didn't understand the dynamics of it. What I knew at the time was that those children were able to really perform well if given the opportunity at the secondary school level. So we were just lobbying at the time for the children to get into secondary school. During that process of us lobbying, I started realizing that there wasn't anything available to parents, because more and more parents were coming out. They were being a part of the school system. Most of them were starting long after the child was preschool age, which was at 5, they had to start. A lot of them were saying there are no early childhood education for the children. They didn't know where to get information. The same experience I had, and there wasn't anybody that they could talk to. And that, it's like while we were lobbying for one thing, I thought it might be best for us to just have an organization to support parents of deaf and hard of hearing children, because we were doing our lobbying as a part of the school. So it was like a PTA group, and I didn't want anything to hamper what we would have wanted to do at the time, because I always have these ideas in my head. And I was thinking way ahead, 5-10 years down the road, other parents may have the same challenge. And I don't want the teachers to tell us, but I can't do that because the Ministry of Education don't allow us to. I don't want to hear those things. So I thought maybe we should form an organization. And I did. With the support of 4 other parents, we started We Care Deaf Support Network.
So what is We Care Deaf Support Network exactly?
So it's an organization registered to support parents of deaf and hard of hearing children and deaf parents. It focuses on empowering and educating parents through support services, programs, information, access to other services that may exist. And it's all part of the advocacy goal. So we advocate as well on behalf of and for our children until they are able to do that themselves. It's specifically one of the first parent-centered organizations registered in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, actually, for parents of deaf and hard of hearing children and deaf parents, because we do support parents who are deaf but have hearing children, or parents who are deaf who has deaf children. So we work on both sides.
All right. So you mentioned earlier that you were told that your son is deaf at the age of 3. Did you say that?
Yeah.
So it sounded like the testing was something that you had to do privately. Was that, and is it available in the healthcare system in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, it's available through DRECHI. That's the only organization, besides you going and pay to do hearing testing, the hospitals and stuff. At the moment, they do screening of newborns, and if your child does have some level of any kind of thing that they may pick up, or you had a challenge in pregnancy, they would send you back to DRECHI to get your hearing test, like a full evaluation and audiogram done. But when I found out my child was deaf, I didn't know anything about DRECHI. I had no clue DRECHI existed. I forgot Cascade School for the Deaf was there. Like I said, there wasn't any information available. So I was given an option that I could get his hearing tested. I used to be with a private pediatrician, and he recommended Dr. Bratt, and that's how I went to Dr. Bratt initially. But I really don't know. I didn't know anything about DRECHI until he started Cascade School for the Deaf, and then I found out, oh, there's an organization that does this and give you free hearing aids and all that, but I didn't know that at the time.
Okay, so lack of information. So
yeah,
maybe things change. Yeah. So what changes you think are needed in the education system in Trinidad and Tobago to better support deaf students and their families?
So I think in education of itself, there's this one thing that we need to understand, that deaf children learn different from hearing children. They conceptualize things differently as well, because their language, which is sign language, is not English. So English should be taught to deaf people and deaf children as a second language and not the first language. Currently, what we do is we project English on them as the first language, not understanding that their first language is sign language. And that's one of the key things. We need a specialized curriculum to accommodate the needs of deaf children. And though I know they usually say, but how many children we really have who are deaf or whatever? The reality is we have 2 schools that are primary schools that accommodate the needs of deaf children. And if we're saying we have Audrey Jeffer's School for the Deaf and Cascade School for the Deaf, then those schools should cater for the needs of them the way they are supposed to be taught, meaning a specialized curriculum that accommodate their learning style and their needs, and teachers and aides who are active signers. We have a lot of people going into the schools and stuff like that who do not know how to sign. And it is appalling. You are sending a teacher to a deaf school who does not know sign language. how is she going to teach those deaf students, or how is he going to teach those deaf students? That is beyond me. Those things should not happen. So to start with, we need a specialized curriculum for deaf children to work with. Understanding that mainstreaming doesn't generally mean putting the deaf child in a school with a set of hearing people. But we have primary schools that are deaf primary schools. We can include family members of those deaf children and other people in those primary schools as well, and let them learn sign language as start learning in sign language as well. It gives the opportunity of us also having more persons who are equipped in signing, who can assist and aid, and the more skilled people who will become interpreters in the long run. So those are some options. Or that's what I think could happen in the education system.
Well, Mary, do you have any additional questions?
I guess if you could give us a little more information about the NGO that you had, so how it would have started, how it would have progressed, and where you all are at now, particularly the role that you all have been playing in supporting parents. Yesterday, I hear you talk a lot about early intervention. However, yesterday when we spoke with Dr. Scarrett, he really brought us to an understanding, I think, Beverly, of the importance of early intervention for these children. So if you could talk a little bit about the work that We Care Deaf Networks, a support network that you all have been doing. Yeah.
Sure. So like I said, we started in 2013. It was registered then. It's over 10 years now the organization has been registered. And when we started off initially, we were registered as a support organization for parents. However, what had happened is at that time, because of the advocacy, and we started raising awareness, it was me. I started doing all these, getting myself involved in all these different things. We strayed from the part of actually focusing on supporting parents, and we were deaf support. So we did a lot of support march, awareness campaigns and programs. I worked along with Nicole Paul of Caribbean Sign Language Center to start sign language as a huge thing in the country, where we started promoting sign language. So we did that through Nicole, Caribbean Sign Language Center, but as we promoted that as well. We did a lot of sensitization and awareness in schools when it came to the children of themselves, understanding themselves, because as parents, because of that lack of communication, and I'll explain that too, it leaves your child with nobody to communicate with your child for you but the teachers in the school. And that's a huge challenge. So we started doing a lot of interventions and advocating, but it was more or less deaf related. And during the COVID time, when COVID started, I was volunteering at the ministry, and I had a lot of parents calling me because they needed support, like food support and stuff like that. So I did. I think I spoke to Mary and a couple of others who I knew could have helped, and they assisted as much as they could. And I used to give hampers to parents, but working in the ministry allowed you the access to different things as well. So I connected them with organizations where they could have had that support as well. And during that time, I realized we strayed from our mandate. And I realigned the organization in late 2021. We had a meeting with both parents, deaf and both hearing parents. So there were two groups that we did, and we wanted to find out, what were their needs. And when they shared their needs, it was the same as when I found out my child was deaf, and I realized we weren't doing specifically what we said we were designed to do. So I decided at that time, I spoke with the team, and they all agreed that, yes, we need to realign. So we realigned the organization to specifically focus on supporting parents of deaf and hard of hearing children. And the deaf parents were saying, but we need support too, because you all can't leave us out. You've been working with the deaf for so many years. Who is going to help us? Because we don't have that English acumen. We can't help our children understand the grammar part of it. So we would need that kind of support as well. And sometimes we too have challenges. We need to talk to somebody. We had, the usual stuff. And I was like, you know what, that's true. So we agreed that we would stick to what we initially started off as being that support for parents of both deaf and hearing parents of deaf and hard of hearing children, and deaf parents who may have hearing children, but they're deaf. So what we've been doing, WeCare has been actively involved in a lot of different things. During the process, within the last 4 years, even during COVID, like I said, we were actively giving out the hampers and visiting homes and stuff like that. And after COVID, I decided to have now I would say me a lot because I do a lot of the groundwork, right? We had this conversation. I had a conversation with the persons at DMU, and there was a concern within the community during the time of the flood many years before when Greenville had flood. And we had a lot of 5 deaf people living in Greenville at the time. It was Greenville, St. Helena, and one of the other in Orapun. We had 5 families we had to support. But nobody knew that they needed help. And it were parents who we had to help because they were part of our team. But at that time, I was wearing a different hat. And I was having conversations with DMU and Red Cross, and we need to have deaf persons trained as disaster, search responders. And in 2022, last year in February, as COVID was lifted, we had the opportunity of getting 12 deaf and hard of hearing persons trained as certified search responders. So we are actually attached to the Chaguanas Borough. We started an early intervention program last year as well. So I traveled back and forth a lot, and part of the traveling was to understand how can we adjust that need. Now I'll go into this part of it. 90% of children are born to hear, deaf children are born to hearing parents. And the percentage of those parents who learn to communicate effectively by using sign language is like about 35 to 40% only. So the rest of those children are left to what? And most times I would hear parents saying, he behaving bad, or she has an attitude, or she very aggressive. But if you are being realistic as a person, and you have nobody in your home as a hearing person, you are living in a house, and you and your family members really don't communicate well, or your sisters and your brothers, they have issues, so they don't really talk, or they just come in and go in, that feels funny. And it gives off a kind of energy. Now think of a deaf child living in a household where nobody else can communicate with you because you are deaf. You can't hear sounds or you can't hear their voices, but you're seeing that they're talking. Everybody else is communicating, laughing, having fun. But you are left out of that. And that makes them feel isolated. That creates a level of, sometimes it's rebellion, sometimes it's just innate anger in them because who can communicate with me? And I only understood that, like I said, because I wear many different hats. I understood that from wearing one of the hats at one point, communicating with deaf people through employment. And I understood that they were behaving like children. Why are you behaving like a child? You're a big woman, you're in your 30s, behaving like a 14-year-old. And then I understood they did not have anyone to guide them through that process as young women or men. Like my mother would have talked to me about menstruation, relationships. I still talk to my mother about things like relationships and things like that, but they don't have the opportunity to have those kind of relationships with their parents. Why? Because nobody in the house can sign. And a lot of parents don't understand the importance of the sign language. I didn't understand it as a mother either until I started actually learning to sign and understanding that, and I think this is what Paulson would have talked about, the language deprivation. Because when children are born, we start accessing language from 0 to whatever age. Deaf children does not have the opportunity to do that. So from birth, they're born and we are talking Mommy, nice child, goo goo gaga, whatever people say to children. I just talk to children normal. We talk to them, but they can't hear our voices. We don't learn to sign, so they miss the opportunity to learn language. And then when they reach 5 or 6 and we get them into the primary school setting, they now have the opportunity to learn language and now start understanding themselves as a person because they're little people. And now start, it's like I'm deaf, and now start understanding that we didn't develop or have the opportunity to grow with our children. When they become teenagers, what they do, they start becoming dependent on those persons who are signers. And once they start depending on those people now have the opportunity to influence your child in ways that you may not want your children influenced, or you may not want things that you may not want your child to learn at a particular age. And that is what happens with deaf people. So part of what we do at We Care is to realign those things, and we do programs and projects with deaf mothers and deaf fathers. We held a workshop with ministry, the Office of the Prime Minister, late last year in 2022 in November, for deaf men and well, we did a basic for deaf women in gender-based violence and understanding self, but we did a 3-day parenting, a workshop with deaf men for them to do the same thing, because a lot of the guys were saying, you know, everybody do things for women, but what about them as men? And the information they shared and how they express themselves as fathers, husbands, it was kind of, wow, we never really thought about some of the challenges the men were having. We also did an early intervention program. So we started, because of the traveling back and forth and getting an understanding of the importance of signing early, we decided we're going to host an early intervention program. And with the help of others, including Dr. Skerritt and a few other persons within the education sector, I sat down and crafted a program. I had some of my friends review it. And we launched an early intervention program last year to support 5 families who wanted the children to get into the primary school setting, but was unable to do that because the children were 5 years old, they're not signers. What we did was we took 3 months to kind of prepare those children for the school setting in September. And actually 3 of them got through, were accepted into the school, and the other 2, well, one of them still, she has another disability besides deafness. So we trying to work on getting her into a different school besides Cascade School for the Deaf or the Jaffa School for the Deaf. But 3 of the children who went through the program, they actually successfully went through the program and ended up being enrolled at the schools. The parents were part of that project too. That's one of the things that we do as well. We encourage parents to learn sign language. So I give parents sign language classes for free. I have not been able to start this year because my schedule is very hectic, and I do it for myself most times with the support of one other deaf person. But we give them sign language classes for free, because though we teach sign language and people go out there and learn, sign language that you would use with your child when you find out my child is deaf and your child is a year or not even like a couple of months old, the signing is different. They wouldn't go in a class and sit down and learn to do those things basically. Because sign language classes are structured a particular way. So we teach you home signs, how to communicate from the time you find out that child is deaf, some of the signs you need to learn and how you communicate with that child. That's just some of the programs. We offer counseling support for parents as well, access to other resource services that maybe you may not know where to go to get this help or that help. And sometimes actually we do the assistance for you, and instead of you doing it, we do it based on how much we can support. We lend support in many different ways to ensure that parents can have what they need to assist the child so that the child can excel. What we are working on currently is some programs and projects to propel VCare to the next level, and some fundraisers to help us raise funds, because we have access to a space that we can use as our head office, but it needs repairs. So we're currently working on raising funds to start the repair so that we would have a head office in Chaguanas. I don't know if that answered the question. I went too far. I don't know. I know I just
Yes, perfect. It was perfect. Okay. Yes, really want to congratulate you and your team for the work that you all continue to do with supporting not only persons who are deaf, but the parents and the families by extension. Yeah. Beverly, anything else?
Well, that seems to be it for
Yes.
this interview.
Wonderful.
So I would add that because of my experience because my son was born deaf, and a friend of mine's brought that to me recently, I was like, wow, Mary told mothers to wear to be honest. I would have had a lot of opportunities, learning opportunities, and I do interpreting now, and I never considered myself to become an interpreter. I never saw myself doing it. Like many other things that I'm involved in, I never saw myself in that field. But it's like, how did I ended up here? And one of my friends recently said, your child was born deaf, and look at you now. You're doing so many different things that you didn't think you would have been doing, and it's true. So it would have afforded me the opportunity to learn. I would not have learned much about deaf education. I would not have been so much into, I love counseling and support. I would not have learned a lot about that and social work and those things if my son was not born deaf. And the opportunities now that I have, where we can now, because I'm trying to get other parents to get involved, is like, we're parents of these children. We're parents. we have like one of the most, I mean, we have a clout above most people. One person asked recently, what makes you stand out different from any other person who sign or anybody else who does this kind of work in the community of the deaf? And I said,
Right.
I'm a parent. I'm a
I tell
parent
this all
who
the
is trying
time.
to learn to communicate effectively with my son and other deaf people who are not my children. I'm a parent who decided that, you know what, they need support. So I'm going to advocate for the rights and teach them how to do that themselves. So, and I was proud to say it. And I hear Mary in my ears in the background. And then I hear my other girlfriend in my ears on the next side. It's like, yeah, I feel proud to say that because I am a parent first, but I'm also an advocate. And those two are the main things. And then I could be anything else. And I think I'm really in me embracing that, I feel very elated about myself for that. And I always used to say I'm grateful that my son was born deaf because I believe God gave us children with special needs for a reason. He don't give you more than you could handle. And it is my son's deafness is not
So
as
they
challenging.
say, eh? So they say.
You don't, girl, you don't. Sometimes we think we what you're doing. But that's it. My son's deafness was one thing compared to other people experiences that they have, and I know it could be a little challenging, but we survive it and we work through it, and just sometimes doesn't realize I've been doing this for 20 years or 30 years, and look, I'm still here. And I take that opportunity to, like, I love supporting, I love assisting and helping in whatever way that I can, and I embrace the fact that I'm a parent advocate, and I like teaching, I like coaching, and I love the opportunity that I have the opportunity to do that with people who are deaf and hard of hearing, and we could do it in sign language. I really enjoy that because I was like, signing is just, now I embrace the fact that I'm branded as a sign language interpreter. So I embrace that as well. So yeah, so I'm finished.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Qushiba, for your time, for your information, and for your ongoing commitment to the population of persons who are deaf and hard of hearing. Do have a wonderful rest of your Saturday and weekend.